Hi, welcome to Leadership in Shorts. Hi, Mukta.
Hi.
I was really looking forward to coming back to this conversation with you. Last time we discussed who is a narcissist, how to identify them from what they say and do. It would be very helpful if we could go through a quick recap to understand.
Sure. So narcissism is, like I said, extreme involvement with self to the degree that it makes a person ignore the needs of those around them. And I also spoke about ways to spot a narcissist, the kind of behaviors that they engage in, like certain kinds of emotionally manipulative behaviors, gaslighting, love bombing, triangulation, and various others. I also talked about, I think, the myth of Echo and Narcissus.
You did.
So today, I also want to refer to another important novel by Oscar Wilde. It's called The Portrait of Dorian Gray. And I think it's another piece of work that our listeners should read if they want to understand a narcissist deeply.
Mhm.
So both Narcissus and Dorian were incapable of interest in or love for anyone else.
Mhm.
They were oblivious to their own arrogance, sense of entitlement, or even cruelty to the women who loved them. So I think it's important. It's an important piece of work if we want to understand narcissism really well.
Thank you, Mukta. In this episode, we shall talk about how to deal with narcissistic people and
Mhm.
narcissism.
Mhm.
But before that, I have a question. How do narcissistic people impact the ones around them? In other words, what happens to people around narcissists?
So, yeah, it's a very important question, and it's indeed difficult to be around a narcissist, not only in personal relationships, but also at work, even socially. So, it's very important to understand what's happening to us when we are around them. So, I think people who are around narcissists, they have a constant feeling of being trapped or blindsided. Yeah. So if somebody is feeling like that, I think it's time to reflect on what's happening to me when I'm around this person. Then there's always this confusion that if this person, this narcissist, says that he loves me, then why does he show me so little empathy?
Mhm.
Yeah. And then there's this feeling of being manipulated, and yet there's a feeling of helplessness to be able to stop it. Yeah. You feel emotionally unsafe and even threatened. You feel frustrated at times. You feel small, isolated, helpless, hopeless. And in intimate relationships, you always confused. What is this happening around me? Why is this person when they behave particularly in a emotionally manipulative kind of a way?
Mhm.
It actually brings in a lot of sluggishness and fatigue and heaviness to the person who's around them.
Mhm.
At work, also, your peers or colleagues or subordinates, they feel very frustrated with a narcissist, and they feel over scrutinized. They feel that they are being watched. Sometimes they feel unseen, unheard,
Mhm.
and most importantly, there's this feeling of not feeling good enough, not being good enough for the person. So you're constantly striving to please the person, and so it's very difficult to be around a narcissistic manager, narcissistic boss, narcissistic peer, or a narcissistic partner.
Mhm. But a lot of leaders are narcissists. They must be doing something really well, isn't it?
Hmm.
I am surprised. Why do people put up with narcissists?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a question mark for people who tolerate narcissists also. It's quite complicated, and it's also pretty simple to understand. Like I said, leaders, narcissistic leaders, or people who are narcissists sometimes are very charming. They're very inspiring. They make things happen. So people tolerate such people because they are making change happen. They're inspiring other people. So that's one very simple reason why people put up with narcissism and narcissists. We call this narcissistic tolerance. And it also happens because sometimes the other person who's tolerating a narcissist also has narcissistic tendencies. So, in a
Mhm.
way, they help each other.
Mm.
So, something in you relates to something in me, I tolerate you. So that's one reason, and not much research has been done on this area. But it's one very important reason why people tolerate narcissists is because of what they bring to the table. The other reason is what we call as the empathy trap. So sometimes people in intimate relationships, they over empathize with the narcissist, and they temporarily even block their awareness of their own needs. And a lot of I don't wish to talk about gender and narcissism here, but yes, a lot of women in narcissistic relationships, so that their partner is narcissistic, they kind of block their own needs and cater to the narcissist, even if the narcissist is kind of emotionally manipulating them, or engaging in behaviors like gaslighting and love bombing and stuff that I talked about in the previous episode. So, yeah, there is this term called as the empathy track, and it is often used in addiction treatment to refer to experience of people who enable loved ones with addictions due to the empathy that they feel. Yeah, but it also applies to relationships which enable unhealthy, imbalanced, or abusive treatment. Yeah. So I think not much work has been done around narcissistic tolerance, but this is an area to explore, really.
Interesting. Are the narcissists self-aware?
Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Again, even if they're aware, are they really doing anything about it? That's the other question. So even if they're aware, some people choose not to do much about it. But there are some leaders who know that they have narcissistic tendencies, and they engage with coaching. And I'm going to talk about a case study of one of the leaders that I've experienced myself as a coach. So I was coaching a leader like that. I'll talk to you about that in a little while. But yeah, the ones who are not aware, and if you make them aware of their narcissistic tendencies, they get very upset at times. So it's really a difficult one. They can be very irritable, they can kind of lash back, they can get into, like I said earlier, a victim mode. So while they are manipulating, they might just project it onto the other person. So it's quite a difficult one to make a narcissist aware of their own narcissism. But there's hope with people who who are aware and who do stuff about it.
More and more large corporations are getting into bed with narcissists. They are finding that there's no substitute for narcissistic leaders in the age of innovation. Can narcissism be productive, creative, both for organizations and the society?
Absolutely, which is why we're talking about this subject. We have many narcissistic leaders who are extremely creative, very productive, and both actually for organizations. And to cite a few examples, like leaders like Jack Welch and George Soros are examples of productive narcissists. They're gifted and creative, and they see the big picture. They find meaning in risky challenges of a changing world, and they also leave behind a legacy. So, particularly if we look at the current scenario where COVID, for example, refuses to leave us, you still have viruses floating around. And in this kind of an environment, actually, a narcissistic leader could be a very inspiring, influencing change agent. Yeah. So there is this whole productivity, creativity kind of a thing that's associated, and influence associated with a narcissist. So we look to productive narcissists in times of great transition, like I said now, because they have the audacity to push through the massive transformation that the society periodically undertakes. So productive narcissists are not only risk takers, they're not only willing to get the job done, but they're also charmers who can convert the masses with their rhetoric. So narcissists will always be popular, yeah. But there's a danger that narcissism can turn unproductive when lacking self-knowledge and restraining anchors. Yeah. Or when narcissists become unrealistic dreamers. And then they have this tendency towards grandiosity and distrust. So that is the Achilles heel of narcissists. That's the weakest point. So even brilliant narcissists can come under suspicion for self-involvement or unpredictability. And in even extreme cases, paranoia. Yeah. So there are, again, two sides of the same coin.
Indeed. Which brings me to the most important question of today. As subordinates, peers, family members, How do we deal with narcissists? You practically live with the manager or your company leader day in, day out. How do you do this without screwing your own self worth?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's the most important question for today. Two things that I'd like to talk about here. One, a narcissistic leader working on self and his own awareness or her own awareness of self.
Mhm.
And the other is about how do people around cope. Yeah. So let me first talk about this one exceptional narcissistic CEO who asked me to help him understand why he often lost his temper with his subordinates. So he lived far away from my home city. So we had sessions on Zoom, and the sessions were quite sporadic and very unorthodox. So he kept a journal of his dreams. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was very fascinating. And then we interpreted some of those things that he talked about together, either by phone or over Zoom. And our analysis uncovered very painful feelings of being unappreciated that went back to his inability to impress a very cold parent that he had. Yeah.
Mhm.
So he came to realize that he demanded an unreasonable amount of praise from people around him now
Wow.
to kind of overcompensate for what he didn't get then. So it was very interesting. And then he felt unappreciated by subordinates sometimes, and then he kind of became furious. So he got to that awareness with some of these conversations that we had. So once he understood that, he was able to recognize his own narcissism and even laugh about it at times, saying, "Look, I'm catching myself do it." Yeah.
Mhm.
So in the middle of work, he even announced to his top team members one day that he was being coached and that we were having these conversations. And then even his subordinates started appreciating this about him slowly. So, one of his subordinates told him that, we see what you're doing and you don't get so angry anymore. So, there was this whole shift or transition that we
Mhm.
saw actually in a case study, and a very senior person. And like I say, it gets very lonely at the top
Yes.
with these leaders, yeah. And then these people who can then work on themselves in a way that they become productive narcissists instead of those destructive ones. Yeah. In addition to being self reflective, they are also likely to be more open, likable, good humored. And like I said, they're charming anyway. So productive narcissists, they have perspective. They're able to detach themselves, laugh at their irrational needs, and obviously they're serious about achieving their goals because they can't fail. And they become playful. They gain this ability to laugh at themselves, and they also gain some humility as they work at themselves. So,
Mhm.
this is one example that I have experienced in my own life. So, I said I should talk about it. And the other piece is about people around this narcissistic leader, and some reflection might help them also in order to make healthy changes. Like we say in behavioral sciences, that you can't change the other person, you can only change yourself.
Sure.
So, the first set of things that I'll talk about here is what can people do to deal with a narcissistic leader or a narcissistic manager. Yeah. So, I think even personal relationships, managing personal relationships with a narcissistic person is quite difficult. So I think it's important to first ask this question, saying, what are the positive aspects of this relationship? How is this relationship bothering me? How is it problematic? What are the emotional needs? What are my emotional needs that go unmet in this relationship? So once you ask yourself these questions, you might be in a better position to manage your expectations. Yeah. So, can I let go of some of my expectations for emotional fulfillment to work with a very special, inspiring narcissistic person? So, that's one of the realistic goals to have
Mhm.
when you're working with a narcissistic person. The other is less contact. Sometimes it's not possible, but wherever it is, can you limit seeing this person or seeing them in situations where those situations are not really very difficult for you? Yeah.
Mm.
Talking about, your emotional needs in a non-threatening way is also another way. And it's about expressing your needs. It is a tough one, yes, I agree. So depending on how deep the narcissistic traits of the other are, telling them that you need more from the relationship Sometimes it can lead to conflict, but keeping it inside, instead of keeping it inside, expressing it in a non-threatening way, finding the right time to have this conversation is also quite helpful. Sometimes estrangement is also an answer. It may sound drastic, but you may just want to not be around that person, or we call it ghosting or breakup or whatever. But then when you're working for a narcissist, and that's a tricky one because they are your managers. So one is because the manager lacks empathy, more empathy from your side might be helpful for you to save your job, unless you have many people wanting you. So empathizing with your boss's feelings, but not expecting a lot of empathy back. So looking elsewhere for your own self-esteem, because narcissistic person is always probably going to make you feel not good enough. So maybe some satisfiers outside, or then it's important to praise his achievements and reinforce his best impulses. Of course, you don't have to be shamelessly sycophantic, because an intelligent narcissist can see through flattery. Yeah. So they know who independently appreciates them and genuinely appreciates them. So they know that. Yeah. So be careful if he asks for an honest evaluation. You must give an honest evaluation. Yeah. Because he'll resent any honesty that threatens the inflated image of self, of themselves. Yeah. So it's important to maintain that delicate balance there, where you're not kind of overly praising them, but at the same time, you're praising them enough. The other one is giving your manager or boss ideas, but letting them take the credit for it. And finding out what they think before presenting your views. Some of those little things work, not in a manipulative way, but yeah, it's always better to anticipate before you meet these people. Then if you believe that they're wrong, show them a different approach instead of telling them that they're wrong, because they can't take it. So can you be more prepared with an alternative when they present something and you differ? Yeah. Disagreeing only when you can demonstrate really how they will benefit from a different point of view. So that's very helpful. The other one is, more tactical, where we say hone your time management skills, because they do ask for certain kinds of things which are sometimes impossible to execute in that amount of time. So carve out free time for yourself only when you know that that there's a lull in his schedule or her schedule. So those are some of the tactical ways of dealing with a narcissistic manager. And of course, you don't have to take bad behavior. Keep your resume polished. I tell this to people, saying if you're good, you don't have to keep working for a bad behaving manager.
That's right. Thank you, Mukta. It was indeed a fascinating peek into the mind and heart of a narcissist. Our audience, I'm sure, will reflect on these insights. And I'm sure there is much more to read and understand about narcissism, but we'll leave that to the listeners.
Sure. It was wonderful talking to you, Deepak, about this wonderful subject. And it's been my favorite for quite some time. And yes, the answer lies in awareness, both of self and others, and then a journey of continuously working on self. For more on leadership, do visit us at www.muktakamplika.com and get in touch with us for leader development needs.